walk the trail along the lake almost every day to the park and the stores and the restaurants, things like that. This trail that goes around Lake Merritt is a parade of humanity. On the average walk, we will see middle-class white people wearing very expensive running shoes, Chinese grandmothers pushing strollers, homeless folks foraging for aluminum cans in the garbage bins, outdoor yoga classes set up shop right on the grass. There is a troupe of Brazilian dancers every Saturday morning who take over part of the trail. We often see hipsters. These are usually white people with lots of tattoos and little mustaches who ride very expensive single-speed bicycles. Black folks with Obama t-shirts, Latino families with babies, and just everything you can imagine is going by on this trail. We also see some fairly unusual things. There's one guy who walks around the lake always with a boa constrictor wrapped around his neck. There's a guy who dresses in cowboy duds, and he walks his horse around the lake, and stenciled in rhinestone on the back of his shirt is Oakland Black Cowboys Association. And there's a guy who he wears gold pants, a gold jacket, and a gold shirt, and a gold bicycle helmet. And he rides a gold bicycle, towing a gold trailer with a gold boombox on it, blasting James Brown. And he didn't repair it. He spray painted everything once it was in place. So even the bungee cords are spray painted. There's also a little Chinese woman who wears only a tube top up top, and she jogs with two pugs on a leash. So it is always amusing. My experience of Oakland is borne out in demographic data about the city. A few years ago, a magazine called The Economist ran an article on Oakland, and it noted that there are over 150 different languages spoken within the city, and that Oakland is one of the most diverse cities on earth because it has virtually every ethnic group on the planet represented, and it has every income level, from homeless folks who sleep on the street every night, all the way to very wealthy people with big houses with views out over the bay. The Economist noted that Oakland is a forerunner to the diversity that characterizes all of California. California in the next decades will look more and more like Oakland. The Economist also said that California's demographics prefigure America's demographics. America is going to look more and more like California as we go on. Now, my hunch is that being a church in that kind of crazy stew of humanity would be difficult. How can so many people from so many ethnic and religious and economic backgrounds come together to be part of the same body? Way back in the 1960s, Martin Luther King commented that the most segregated time in America was 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. All these people have their own churches. And I see that driving through the city. There are Korean Presbyterian churches and Chinese Catholic churches, Black Baptist churches. There's an Armenian Orthodox church not too far from me. There's a Mexican Pentecostal church that I bicycle past often. There are white churches of every variety. There are also mosques and synagogues and Buddhist temples. There's a great big Mormon temple. And just behind my house, there's something called the Temple of Practical Christianity. I would like to go, but I'm always busy. So, what would it look like if you tried to gather representatives from all of these places and form a single church? That would be, I think, a very interesting experiment. It turns out that someone has tried. And it was really, really hard to get that many different kinds of people together functioning as a body. The wealthier members resented the poorer members because they thought the poorer members were taking them for granted and riding on their coattails financially to support the church. People with different kinds of spiritual practices ended up fighting about what church should look like. Should it be high church, low church, that sort of thing. And a lot of these people had different physical needs and social needs, and they wanted the church to serve their own needs. Eventually, some factionalism developed in the church, and there were breakaway groups. So some of the wealthier members ended up having their own fellowship times where they could eat more expensive meals together, basically. And then some of the groups within the church sued each other in court. So it was a real mess. Now this church that I'm talking about was not actually in Oakland proper. It was a little ways away. It was actually in ancient Corinth, in Greece. It was founded by the Apostle Paul, and it is the subject of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians that we just heard from. But there are some really striking parallels between modern Oakland and ancient Corinth. Both are port cities, both live in the shadow of more successful cities. Both have great diversity, both ethnically and economically. And both were attracting a lot of new people. Figuring out what a church looks like in a new kind of environment like that is hard. Corinth had people from all across the Roman Empire living there. And the empire was very tolerant of multiple religions. So there were cults of every different kind, Jewish synagogues, all kinds of religions fighting it out for members. And Corinth also had very wealthy merchants and the lowly deckhands who just got off their ships. In his first letter to the Corinthians, Paul was asking people why they couldn't just get along. Why couldn't they act like Christians? They were fighting about who got to eat first, and who was more gifted spiritually, and who should be in charge of things. In chapter 11, which is one chapter prior to the bit that we just heard, Paul talked about how the people should be together during church services. Way back then, this was in the 50s, the first century, church services were actually a real meal still. They hadn't developed very much liturgically yet. So it was a dinner service. And the wealthy people would arrive early and eat a big meal. And when they were full, they would unlock the doors and let the rest of the people come in to have the leftovers. Paul told them pretty sternly that this was not a very good way to be a community together. And then moving on to our chapter, the issue is speaking in tongues. And a few people in this community spoke in tongues, and they thought that they were superior as spiritual people to everyone else. They said everyone else needed to be like them. So Paul used the analogy of the body that we heard. A body which needs many different parts to function as a whole. He said speaking in tongues was just one small part of that body. The body also needed apostles and teachers and leaders and healers and helpers and also tongue speakers. So that any part of the body was left out, then the whole body would suffer. Like one of our bodies, if we broke an ankle or lost an eye, we would not be complete anymore. Then Paul takes that analogy further when he said that the less important parts of the body, the parts we don't pay attention to, like the toes or the thigh or whatever you like, those parts should actually be honored more because they get less attention and they probably need a little more help. So Paul created this sense of collective success or failure as a church. Because if one member of the body suffered, the whole body would be disabled. Immediately after that, we get 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which we did not hear from today, but which I suspect many of you know pretty well, because a lot of you had it at your weddings. Anyone remember that? Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Raise your hand if that was in your wedding. Okay, it is the most commonly used text at the wedding. And we tend to think of it in terms of beautiful romantic love. And I hate to break it to you, it has nothing to do with that. 1 Corinthians 13 is Paul's solution to the divisions in the church that he's talking about in 1 Corinthians 12. He's trying to unite all these fighting factions into a single body. And he says that love is the glue that holds these community members together. And that love is more important than any of the individual's gifts or talents. So, when it was read at your wedding, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, he's talking about speaking in tongues from the earlier chapter. But if I do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. He's talking about these people who thought they were better than everyone else. When Paul said, if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. There he's talking about people who had the gifts of prophecy and wisdom and prayer, who thought they were better than others. Paul said all those gifts are meaningless if the people who possess them don't share them lovingly. And when Paul said, if I give away all my possessions and if I hand over my body so that I may boast but do not have love, I do nothing. There Paul is saying that the people who donate the most money and the most time but don't have love have missed the point. So our chapter 12, raises a lot of the challenges inherent in being a church made up of people from different backgrounds and with different talents. In chapter 13, so the solution to that was remembering that loving relationships within a community are more important than your background or your talents. How you treat people is more important than what you are. Now I want to come back to the modern world and ask what this might have to do with us here at Church of the Resurrection out in the San Francisco suburbs. It was not too long ago that the Episcopal Church was viewed as the domain of middle-class white people. And the United States was conveniently dominated by middle-class white people. So this worked out pretty well for us. But that country and that church are gone. We cannot be church anymore like we used to be. We want to share the living gospel with the world around us. As I said earlier, the future of Pleasant Hill, the future of all of California, looks more like Oakland, and the future of America looks like California. Our country is going to look more like ancient Corinth every year. Being the body of Christ in that world is going to be hard for us. It's going to stretch us in ways that we haven't had to be stretched before. But if St. Paul could do it, this one guy challenging the Roman Empire, certainly we can try. Paul's letter to the Corinthians reminds us that our relationship with God doesn't mean that much unless our relationships with a crazy, diverse, and often uncomfortable mix of people around us are governed by love. talents, our status as ordained ministers, all the gifts we give, don't mean very much without loving relationships. Now, in a few moments, we're going to gather around this table for communion. Paul reminds us fairly starkly that our place in the body of Christ is only in part about this vertical access to God that we find through bread and wine. Becoming the body of Christ isn't about a private moment of communion between you and God. There's also a horizontal axis that connects us to all the people around us. Becoming the body of Christ means realizing that you are a unique individual who is bonded through love to a wider community. Or, more simply, a relationship with God is not about how holy you are. It's about how you treat people.